And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have two of my good brothers here in the temple. In the blue corner, our living Wikipedia, good brother Flutter, and in the red corner, because he is the Aka Oni, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Fuck all your opinions on mecha, mine are objectively right, as dictated by the fact that I'm CEO of an entire corporation that makes mecha. Eat my shit!
Yep, we're starting off hot. Yeah, there's a reason we use the phrase, it's a free country and you are free to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't use that, we can go with the it's a free speech platform, you are still free to be wrong. But, and as an aside, anybody who parrots that line from Giga from all those years ago without taking the piss is wrong just by default.
Yes.
Doubly so if you use the phrase overrated. I'm honestly sick of that phrase. Even I don't like using it when I do use it. But we're not here to talk about mecha, at least not this time around, or to talk about certain folks having really, really, really bad takes, even in a controversial takes thread. No, we are here to talk about martial characters in games. Which is why this is another entry in the class warfare series on this show. This time around, respecting the martial. Now, for a bit of context, and hey there, Damien, welcome to the show. A while back, I was scrambling to put up the schedule for the next few GeekWatch episodes. There were other things that had a bit of my attention for understandable reasons. I've made that clear. But one of them was going to be on the whole overpowered mages thing, which is something that Zan and I have ranted about on more than one occasion in the Valley of the Judged. But the more that I thought about, the more I realized that doesn't exactly fit the ethos of this channel. So instead, I decided to pivot. Instead of beating down the whole OP mage thing, which everybody knows, and the old school types will try and explain away with some really bad takes. Instead, I felt it would be better to go the opposite route and talk about games that don't have this problem. But before we can even get into that, I think we need to go into what exactly the martial problem is. And since I've been doing a good amount of talking, Zan, I will let you play the evangelist as you always do.
About respecting the martial?
Yeah.
All right.
Why is this something that would even be a burr up our ass to begin with?
Well, there are many reasons. If we just go to the world's most litigious game alone, since we so love to use it as a beating horse, there is the age-old meme of the quadratic wizard versus the linear fighter. But even then, that's not going quite into martial like we are meaning here. That's just a character who fights without magic versus a character who uses magic. When we are talking about respecting the martial, we're talking about systems that actually give a damn about how the martial system works within their game. Whether that's such as our good brother here in the temple, Brother Joel's Lone Wolf Fists, or whether that's more esoteric games or games other people may not have necessarily heard of. Legend of the Wulin, maybe? That'd be another good one. These are games that try to get that idea of actually performing in a martial fashion rather than it just being a bland attack action with some descriptor flavor. And they actually care about the system and how it works. So that's what we mean by respecting the martial. We're looking at the games that have a martial system, a dedicated martial system that works well and integrates well with the rest of the machine that is the game.
Yes. Now, I'm well aware that I pick on the world's most litigious fantasy game quite a bit. A lot of it is due to the fact that its impact as the industry leader creates a few assumptions that people have that I find to not only just be wrong, that'd be one problem, but be actually damaging to the long-term health.
Yes.
The big one is because of the fact that let's look at the fighter. We've talked about this in the past, but I want to go into detail on this to bring up one particular narrative. The fighter started out as the fighting man, and it was just a transfer over of your standard troop fighter that you've been seeing in war games in one form or another since the 70s. Even before that, if we want to count the old Strategio projects. Although that's a debatable thing, and I really don't feel like bringing up that or the Kriegspiel stuff from the 1890s. That's a rabbit hole I'm going to have to go down later this year. I don't want to yet, because I know when I do, I'm not coming out. But because of the fact that it was that transfer over in the same way that mages were meant to be artillery back in the days of chainmail, you ended up with them doing mostly the basic attack. But you didn't have anything else to back it up, because in a war game, a line of troops doing a basic attack is a line of troops.
It is.
But because of the fact that that's all that they were doing was basic attack, or in later editions, basic attack with some modification, it became known as the beginner's character, Babby's first character. The one you give to the newbie when you don't trust him to handle more complicated affairs. And a big reason this is an issue with me, oddly enough, has to do with martial characters in popular culture outside of games. Let's consider. A lot of people bring up Conan the Barbarian, but that's too easy. Let's bring up Zorro.
He's very, very skilled.
Very skilled. The poster child for the old school vigilante, to the point that he was one of the inspirations for Batman.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not conjecture on my part. That is word of God.
Yep.
But when you try and adapt him into a lot of old school setups, you either have to go with fighter or some variation of later rogue. Not necessarily thief, although some could argue that's the case. But the fact that all of the dodges, the parries, the ripostes, the general swordplay of that sort of swashbuckling character is represented in a single dice roll and a static defense does not carry the class fantasy. And because of the fact that it doesn't carry it, it ends up creating this third wheel when you have the rogue who's doing skills and contributing in other manners within dungeons, and the cleric and wizard who are doing cleric and wizard things to the point where they're making everybody else pointless.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why I don't consider myself a OSR guy, because they would look at this kind of thing and see absolutely nothing wrong with it, or that adding a bunch of powers makes the thing too video gamey. You especially see this from both the college know-it-all crowd and the some of the CSA people that Zen and I have dealt with. We've gone over that story about how one of the guys there got pissy at you for using a spear in a manner that wasn't just stand and poke.
Yes. The fact that I would sweep and chop and otherwise use a spear in the ways that everyone sees people use spears in fashions outside of rank and file battle, because that's totally what a knight would have done on the field of battle, is just stand and poke, right?
No,
Totally.
Except you weren't even playing a knight; you were playing a Landsknecht.
I mean, that does technically mean land knight. Technically. But the point is, I'm trying to compare myself to those lofty elitist assholes. Even they would not use this. Well, I mean, some of them probably would just stand and poke because they're retarded. But let's go back to the actual 1400s or the 1300s or the 1200s. You think a fucking knight would use a spear as stand and poke? God, no. First of all, they'd hand the pikes to the pikemen and be like, "Pike wall, you motherfuckers." And then, if they had to use a spear, well, that spear is going to be used any way that works.
Yeah.
Just remember, if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid.
It's not stupid.
That's stupid.
The other thing is the fact that contrary to there is no such thing as a fair fight.
No.
And I get the feeling the people who are like, you can't use a spear like that. That's not the knightly thing to do. Would probably be the same people who who almost 100 years ago would say you're not supposed to take cover in battle. That's not sporting. Or should I bring up the Charger? The second-rate mech that normally is just a few lasers and that's it, until people realized you can throw hands. And yeah, and they don't put the idea of getting into fisticuffs in any of the mech simulators.
When that's something that Mecha can do.
Depends on which mech we're talking about.
It does depend on the type, but still.
Oh, Flutter, if you get the chance, I'd recommend watching Tex's video on the Charger to get what I mean. The point is that the Charger was considered second rate, especially compared to the Awesome, which only cost 1 million C-bills more. But when the succession wars started happening, and all the really good stuff started getting a bad case of explosions, the second rate stuff started to show up more and more, and people made do with what they had.
Yeah.
Granted, and Awesome is still better for the money, but if you want to bull rush somebody and get them to trade fists, well, there you go. Also in the comments, I see Matt Wheaton asking our favorite class. That's not, as far as D&D, that's not something that I can answer because it ultimately depends on which version I'm going with. As much as I have the whole monk gimmick, I'm not going to be using monks in, say, 3rd edition or Pathfinder, where they were the poster boy for Mad.
The poster boy for Mad, indeed. I don't play D&D anymore. So my favorite class is none.
Yeah. And of course, for me, there's just too many moving parts for me to answer that. Plus, I've been doing this for too long. In regards to the question of what is my favorite, because I've told you guys this before, but I don't. But even in like fighting games or hero shooters, I don't main anybody.
Yeah.
Because I feel if I do, whenever I do that, I start making worse plays. So that better to cycle out.
Yeah.
Now, Damien also says that his mindset for fighters is that they should be designed to lead the henchmen at the head of the line. Here's the problem with I don't disagree with that, but there's one particular problem with that. That's just one aspect.
Yeah.
The problem with saying that the fighter is meant to be, say, the Conan XP is that's just one approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly think that what's considered classes or archetypes or what have you should require a bit more specificity. I think this is the reason why when you go outside the D&D bubble, you don't see the equivalent to just the fighter. Even let's look at one of my favorites in Exalted. The Dawncast of Solars are definitely the most martial of the Solars, but they are not described as the fighting man. They're described as the captains, the generals, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You technically have the Bushi with L5R, but the four archetypes in L5R are extremely broad. What's going to define your character more in that setup is your choice of school.
Right.
Like a Hida Bushi and an Isawa Bushi are going to operate in completely different ways.
Absolutely.
And that's the kind of thing that I'm far more that I think is far more on point. The other factor is that I'd say with a lot of games that are designed and hold that thought for one moment. I need you guys to do a bit of filibustering.
Okay.
All right.
Filibustering?
Yep.
I mean, we're good at filibustering, I think. Something like that. We need to pick up from where he left off.
Yeah. You're more focusing on just one aspect, and we're more casting a broader net with this problem.
Yeah. We want to point out not like what is martial within a larger, what small aspect is martial within a larger game. Mm-hmm. We want to point out games that have an entire martial system.
Yeah.
One that is plugged into, as part of the main core conceits of the game. Mm-hmm. Doku, you're late and gay. Get your ass in here.
He said he would join, but he has to be up in less than 5 hours.
6 hours, 5 hours. I don't care, Doku. If you're gonna come in late and gay, you at least have to come in for like 10 minutes. 10 minutes. That's all of your time I asked for. I haven't talked to you in forever, and I need someone else to bounce off of for more filibustering because, we can make things crazy. Get your ass in here for at least 10 minutes. I'll sell you 9 minutes, and the last minute is free. There you go. Nah, go get some sleep, man.
Yeah.
Go get some sleep, Doku. I'm only kidding. I know you got to be up early, so get out of here. But
yeah.
Ultimately,
well, they screwed up.
finding places, even where there are smaller martial factors, can be
I asked them to get
one of those places we can go, there's another good job.
Of orange and 1 2
But we
liter
really
of
want
Diet
to
Coke.
emphasize the big
They got 1
things,
2
the
liter
big
of Sprite
system
and
itself.
one of orange.
Like Monk pointed out about Exalted, the Dawn cast of the Solars are
Sorry
definitely
about that.
the most martial, but that doesn't a martial system make.
Oh, no, it doesn't.
Yeah. 20 minutes next week, Doku? Okay, I could take that. Sleep well.
Yeah.
In the end, there are a lot of games that are entirely built around martial systems. A lot of them could be seen as Wuxian games because, I mean, that's kind of what those genres are about.
Yes.
Is being extremely martial. And like I pointed out before,
Plastic cup thing.
Brother Joel's game Lone Wolf Fists is entirely built around a martial system.
We don't have any plastic cups.
Everything is that is like the literal core of the game, and exploring how that interacts with the rest of the game is really an interesting idea. Because some games are only going to be about the combat. I'm pretty sure that it makes sense for a wuxia game to be almost entirely about the combat.
It very much does. It's very
But-
much that word means.
But then there are also going to be games that have a strong martial system that also have other large systems as well. And I think that the interaction between those larger systems, say you have a game that has a very robust martial system, but also a very robust exploration system, is going to have some very interesting ideas. In some cases, you may have a stunt system of some sort that allows you to use your martial skills to solve things outside of a martial situation. I mean, who all remembers the episode of G Gundam where Master Asia and Domon Kashu used the Sekiha Tenkyoken to flip a giant thing of concrete to get out from the underground? I do. I mean, I remember that mostly because I've been talking Gundam all day and also because G Gundam is fantastic. But
Yeah.
Also, filibuster's over. I am back.
I was just getting going, Monk. Come on.
Also, I'm looking through the comments. I see Doku, but since he said he's just stopping by, I'm not going to give him shit.
I already gave him shit for us, Monk.
He said I'll give you 20 minutes next week. And Damien says like Weapons of the Gods. We've talked about Weapons of the Gods, and I love Weapons of the Gods to death, but it and Legends of the Wulin have the same problem. The formatting is absolute trash. And for a guy like me who places a really, really, really big deal on navigation in books, that it's not enough to be a deal breaker in, say, Legends of the Wulin, as I covered in my review of it, but it does damage it. And
Damage is done.
yeah. And the whole thing of putting mechanic stuff in the middle of fluff chapters does not sit with me.
No, yeah, that shouldn't be the case.
If you're going to put fluff in your game and at least have mechanics in it as well, it might be better to do it how the storyteller system did, where they had the little stories before an entire chapter of stuff.
Yeah, or just
Shadowrun did the same thing, just in a different way, although the version that did it the best is still going to be Exalted with the mini comics between chapters. Oh, and of course the best version of that was the one in the black and white treatise. I haven't read too much of Exalted 3rd edition for
obvious reasons.
Obvious reasons, the least of which being my bad blood with Onyx Path.
Yeah.
I know that was years ago, but you know how it is with the book.
Yeah.
Well, also, Onyx Path is a terrible company to begin with, so, it's not like they've improved since then, Monk.
No. I'm I'm still waiting for them to finish off their relaunch of Trinity. They've only gotten like 1.5 done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since like they've done Aeon and a little bit of Aberrant. Adventure hasn't been done at all. But when it comes to now, the other, it is funny to bring up something like Weapons of the Gods and the styles, because with both that and with Exalted, those styles amount to ability trees. And Damien, you just brought up 3rd edition Exalted, and yeah, that's just reinforcing why I fell off with Exalted, especially since Godbound exists. Which Godbound technically has a martial system, but only if you have the deluxe version of Godbound, which I do. In that case, it's the Strifes, which are more akin to the sidereal martial arts from Exalted, in the sense that they're imposing something on the environment. Granted, a lot of that happens with Exalted, with the sidereals, and especially with Godbound. But it is something to put into consideration.
Right.
Imposing upon the environment is actually something you do martially in real life.
Yeah.
Take advantage of your terrain.
But the big problem when it comes, I've always said for the longest time that the concept of a fighter class is something that needs to be divided. The concept alone is far of the character who's good with weapons is far too broad to create any sort of system that has a meaningful impact.
That it is, because you're dealing with more weapons than people think of regarding that class.
Well, on top of that, when you think of someone who is good with all weapons all the time, you don't think of the word fighter. You think of
no, you don't. You think of
master.
You think of warrior or weapon master. Yes.
Fighter and warrior are used interchangeably in a lot of materials.
Fair.
A lot of people, when they think of the word fighter, they think of it so generically. It just means a person who fights.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case. That's the actual dictionary definition, but that's not the definition we're using in tabletop.
The other problem is, and this is something we've talked about when we were designing our fighter job for FF Legend. The whole notion of you can equip any weapon doesn't have that much impact when most people are going to pick one particular method of equipping their character and stick with it. Somebody who picks a greatsword is going to be sticking with greatswords for the remainder of the campaign and rarely shifting out of that.
Yeah.
That also depends on the system, but this is most commonly seen in the world's most litigious RPG, and that's because the differences between weapons generally aren't enough to be important to switch between.
I'm guessing that's why John Wick wanted to argue that weapon lists are pointless in RPGs, which I see where he's coming from. But this is also the same guy who claimed that game balance is unnecessary, and he's infamous for some of the broken stuff he did during his tenure with Legend of the Five Rings.
Well, we've seen systems where the differences between weapons are remarkable. Mm-hmm. Like they are actually important and do have a mechanical advantage and disadvantage that you would want to consider depending on the situation. So in a situation where you have weapons like that, a fighter, the guy who can equip any weapon, could be extremely useful.
The other problem, though, is in a lot of those systems, switching between weapons has so much of an action tax as to not be worth it. Or the differences between like, let's look at the difference between, say, a longsword and a mace in a lot of the most litigious role-playing game. A lot of the time
is damage type.
Yeah. And damage type is rarely going to have an impact unless you're dealing with non-physical types of damage
or constructs.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some people are going to be anal about the whole thing of skeletons being resistant to slashing damage, but they're a rare case.
That they are.
More often than not, you're gonna have them do the even with that damage type, it's still doing the same amount of damage as any other one-handed weapon. Which
D8 last I remember.
Yeah,
I'm sure a mace and a longsword were both D8.
Yeah, D8 plus mods. Oh,
yeah, and then like. The only advantage you might have with a longsword is depending on how the longsword is defined, you can have it as a versatile weapon. Oh, that's D10 plus mods, but you're using both hands.
Sometimes it's not even that. It's just numbers go up.
Yes.
And of course the other issue is we talked about the fighter quite a bit, so let's bring up the monk and the fact that the monk is treated as unarmed combat in a one-size-fits-all manner.
When that is not what a monk should be.
Well,
especially since there are numerous monks of numerous areas, both in the east and the west, that used actual weapons.
Yes,
I get the fact that the idea that a lot of people are going to have when it comes to the monk class or archetype is going to be Shaolin monks.
But even then, you only have to look at real life Shaolin Kung Fu to see that it's not just unarmed.
If we're just going to invoke Kung Fu, let's not forget that there's 1,500 different variants. Probably more.
Well, 1,500 different variants of what is known as Kung Fu, yes. Shaolin, both Northern Shaolin and I guess Southern Shaolin, have their various styles and forms. But yes, just with the word Kung Fu alone, which doesn't even mean martial arts, it means hard work. You have a massive amount of variants, and in some cases they call other types of martial arts Kung Fu because all martial arts are hard work. But some people have referred to
using a generalization of the term.
Yes, it is. The big thing is that the Shaolin do not just use unarmed combat; they have plenty of weapon forms.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're evoking the idea of a Shaolin monk, or even if it's not specifically a Shaolin monk, but a warrior monk of the East, because that's the general cliche, I guess is the best word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The general trope.
Yeah.
You can have the unarmed guy who's in barely any robes and is wearing some prayer beads, or you can have the guy who has slightly thicker robes, more prayer beads, and a monk's spade. Or you can have a guy who does nunchuck battles because nunchucks are cool. There are plenty of different East Asian monastic order type battlers who don't fight with only fists, feet, and other extremities of the body.
And even if we decide to appeal to the HEMA crowd and acknowledge the hate boner that they have for people bringing up Asian martial arts, and just go with European stuff. There's still a significant amount of difference. I remember when I was doing and I've talked about this in the past, when I was doing fencing, and there were a bunch of different grips for fencing weapons.
Yes.
I had the French version, which is probably the easiest one to work with. But there was the German version, which looked like a pistol. And there was also the Italian version, which I am not a fan of. Nothing against Italians. It's just the way Italian foils are handled is weird, and obviously meant for smaller hands.
Mm-hmm. Which doesn't help for people our size.
No. Whereas the French version was just a standard handle with a little bit of a contour.
Mm-hmm.
But you of course have different melee and ranged weapons from different cultures. There's, again, people could argue a significant amount of difference between, say, a claymore and a Zweihander.
Yes. And I could actually tell you the difference between the two in detail, but that's a different story.
Mm-hmm. And reducing both of them to just two-handed melee weapon is correct, but lacks impact.
Yes.
And that's a key thing that I'm going to end up bringing up a lot is impact. I'm not saying that every player should feel like a superhero or something like that, but they should feel at least that their choices are having an impact both in the story and in the scene. Sometimes that impact is positive, sometimes it's negative, but it is moving things forward in some manner. This is also why I'm a fan of Fail Forward, but that's another story entirely.
Mm-hmm. It's the idea that both the mechanical choices you make and the narrative choices you make intermingle in a way that makes playing the game fun, because you get to see the results occur in the game.
And I know somebody in the comments will bring up the whole thing of, well, what about the fighting styles that fighters and rangers have in 5e? Those barely have any impact once you're up in the teens.
Yeah.
Which is also a part of the why nobody plays 5e past level 10 discussion we had a while back, kind of focused on at that time.
Mm-hmm. And the big takeaway I had from that is the fact that it's not as cut and dry as people think.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the fact that I've covered this in the past, but let's consider that whole, well, you can use D&D to run any kind of fantasy. Okay. Let's put this into the perspective. I know I've brought up the samurai thing quite a bit, but I'm going to use a different example.
Okay.
The most common way to equip characters melee wise is like a sword or a mace. Well, let's consider India, where the weapons with the biggest cultural impact are going to be spears and bows, especially bows.
Oh yes.
You're gonna see some crazy ass archer if you spend enough time watching Bollywood epics, which everybody should do because those things are freaking nuts
and hilarious.
Hilarious, and if you need a go-to entry, the recent RRR, even though it technically isn't a Bollywood film, is a good gateway drug.
Right.
It's also a damn good story as it is.
Mm-hmm.
But The thing is, you would have to either either have to do reskinning or just reanalyzing or even doing a whole new weapon list in order to make that work. I bring up the samurai one as an example because of the popularity of sword and board in a lot of fantasy games, whereas the closest thing I can find to a shield in medieval Japanese fighting is that short spear and turtle shell style that originates in Okinawa.
Ah,
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of shields unless they were emplaced fortifications almost.
And that doesn't count, and we know it.
Yeah.
no, that's,
The most you had in the form of a quote unquote on person shield is the rows of lacquered silk that you would see adorn higher rank samurai armor, meant to fend off arrows. Those flat sheets of rows of lacquered silk that were on the shoulders and the knees protected the joints from arrows. That's the
And
closest thing.
that's just armor.
Mm-hmm.
No matter which way you slice it, it's still armor.
That was a bad pun, but I'll give it to you tonight, Monk.
yeah.
You are not the aim of my ire.
Well, it also felt kind of obvious. I kind of had to do it.
Low hanging fruit, but yes.
Now, the other issue is let's consider how in a lot of fiction you have somebody who either has a special weapon or a special fighting style, sometimes both. And the when it comes to the former, the instance I bring up is the Atlantean sword from Conan the Barbarian, a sword taken from a temple devoted to Crom, which is a bit contradictory, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But it is a sword essentially made from Atlantean steel,
Yes.
and is shown to be much tougher than the standard steel that is used in Hyboria. Along with the inscription "Suffer no guilt, ye who wields this in the name of Crom."
Yes.
If you were to convert that into a lot of old school games, it would just be a masterwork bastard sword.
Yeah.
Which is stupid.
It doesn't connect the story. And I use this exact same thing with, say, the Master Sword from Legend of Zelda. If you convert that to a lot of those styles, it would just be an enhanced longsword.
Yeah.
When the whole thing is it's the weapon of the hero of time, the blade of evil's bane in all of the stories.
Yeah.
Essentially Excalibur in all but name, to the point where it's been in stone in several occasions.
Yes.
So having that just be doing numbers go up with a standard weapon, the player isn't going to feel empowered for going through all of that trouble to get it.
No, they aren't.
And I've seen some people use the realism card on this, and once again, I will iterate: believability is more important than realism. Realism, in that reductive way, is not interesting. Now, this is where the other thing that I want to bring up, and this is the reason why I brought up the whole specialized style, is if I have to use a contemporary example of this, let's consider the lightsaber styles in Star Wars. In the actual continuity of Star Wars, fuck you, Disney.
Mm-hmm.
The seven forms and the side forms that are seen, even if it gets a little bit confusing with two different forms of Shien.
Yeah.
But each of these has their own personality and their own kind of approach, and can be reflective of the character that is using them.
Like for example,
Let's
Form
consider
3 is more. Or go ahead.
Form 3, the patience form, is all about absolute defense.
Yes.
And its adept that we saw in the prequels was Obi-Wan, who was certainly more patient.
That he was.
He switched to Form 3 after Qui-Gon died, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when it comes to let's also consider Count Dooku, whose form of choice was Makashi, which suited his approach as this count who happened to be a master swordsman.
Mm-hmm.
It was a duelist form, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That it is.
And you have Vader using Gem So, because although to be fair, a lot of characters in the original trilogy use Gem So, but
They do.
in his case, it's more the fact that his style was all about breaking someone.
Yeah.
And those are just a few examples. But I bring these up because because you can have just as much characterization in a character's fighting style as anything else. Much the same way that you can have with magic, but one of this is somehow harder for people to wrap their head around. The funny thing is, once you venture into the more manga influenced games, you have that problem less and less of people falling into the Babby's first character trap.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that could be the fact that a lot of what's considered the traditional class system doesn't quite work when you bring in characters from manga or from wuxia, and especially tianxia.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Imagine trying to adapt Sun Wukong into any D20 system.
Yeah, you're going to have difficulties there.
And hell's the reason I've always been iffy about trying to use those kind of systems for something like Avatar, which
Right.
the battles in that setup are all heavily improvised. You can't really have a set effect list.
No, you can't.
Now,
Given the various forms of bending.
there's but one particular avenue when it comes to developing that style that some games have done a better job than others is finding a way to customize that. And it's at this point that I have to bring up the glorious insanity that is Anima. Because not only did it do that, it did that 3 different ways. Even more so if you decide to bring the Xset books into the mix.
Oh,
Right.
the Xset books.
But you have the whole thing with the techniques, which there's already a good amount of technique trees, but being able to create your own techniques is more games need to have a build your own spell or build your own technique system in them, I think. It's just something that I think is a bit underrated.
I think the primary reason that they don't is it can lead to some analysis paralysis.
If done improperly, yes, and even Anima's no exception to this.
For me, it was a matter of speed. That's the only reason I didn't make my own moves for that review so long ago, Monk.
Yeah. If I ever revisit Anima for a future project, that's the idea of creating moves is something I'll certainly be considering. But but of course there was also the key techniques and the martial arts style modules. Which just with the modules themselves, a Tau who knows what they're doing can do some crazy stuff.
Exactly.
The same thing can apply to Weapon Master, although I'd say Weapon Masters didn't really start becoming a threat until the Ars Magnus materials started coming out.
Okay, I can see that.
Simply because the modules that Weapon Masters would have access to was kind of limited compared to what a Tau could take advantage of. Now, this is also the reason why I speak so highly of the spheres of power and spheres of might systems, because you do have that customization in a way that isn't going to be as analysis paralysis, I think.
Yeah, the sphere systems tend to be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, usually.
Well, if somebody wants to be a blaster caster with the sphere system, the answer is pretty straightforward. Take Elementalist, take the Destruction Sphere, half the work's done. Everything after that is just giving you more ways to blaster caster. And Dragon, I have no idea what you just put in the comments.
He made a Mask Man reference.
I haven't seen enough of Masked Man, and I'm not sure if that applies in this instance.
Yeah, not really. I'm just using key, but
yeah. And we brought up Exalted in the past, and it had an interesting approach to martial arts, even if they were just another form of charm trees. But the reason why I think it skirts past is, for one, unlike say feats, the requirements are pretty simple, relatively speaking. You still have to deal with but the main requirements you have to deal with for the most part is just your essence level and your level of that particular skill. Of course, the tree cascades can get a bit nuts. Even more so, depending on which type of Exalted we're dealing with. Looking right at you, Autochthon and the Fair Folk.
yeah.
But there is one particular tactic that allows it to skirt past the issue, and that is both combos and flurries. Being able to make a custom combo of the charms that you have available. It's a costly venture, but it is a case of rewarding you for system understanding. And of course, if we want to just do customization when it comes to equipment, well, Odinel's Codex would like to have a word. and and of course, I think a lot of the bigger issue is just you have this generational issue of tradition of certain traditions for their own sake. Like when people swear up and down that fighters aren't supposed to be powerful. If that's the case, then what's the point of playing one?
My response was going to be, then what's the point?
Like, regard even the most grimdark kind of game is going to have its elements of power fantasy. Like, as much as people make the grimdark jokes about Warhammer, it's still full of larger than life characters. Some more legitimate forms of larger than life, and some a bit illegitimate. Looking at you, Caiaphas Cain, hero of the Imperium.
A man who thinks himself a fake.
Just any hero character that you see associated with orcs, or even better, any hero character you associate with Skaven, because the biggest enemy to the plans of a Skaven is another Skaven. But the other issue but then when you started to get a generation of folks who were looking at the over the topness of anime and manga, they naturally wanted to integrate some of that into their games. And a lot of the people who have this mindset of we need to be taking notes from Tolkien, Moorcock, and Lieber all the time cried foul. And yes, I'm using this as a lead-in to talk about the Book of Nine Swords again.
We love the Book of Weeaboo fighting magic around here.
I do find it incredibly ironic that that particular supplement was accused of having martial characters stepping on the toes of mages.
You know what it is, Monk?
What?
Do you know why this is?
Go on.
And I hate to be that guy that points out the stereotypes in a lot of groups, but a lot of people who play pure spellcasters imagine themselves better than the people who play the melee classes because they're not meatheads. Like, I'm smarter than that guy, it's okay. When you start stepping on their toes and into their realm, even as a martial character, they feel like the thing they were special for is no longer special.
They need to be so special for it that they step on other people's toes. Irony.
Mm-hmm. Not realizing that this is a team game.
Yeah, there's definitely that, and they're usually that person who says that their build isn't that powerful, despite the fact that they're one-shotting and auto winning entire boss fights.
Mm-hmm.
But and yes, I will freely admit that a lot of this issue is less and less prevalent once you step outside the D20 bubble. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that tradition for its own sake, it can provide a reliable foundation, but it can also provide a crutch.
Not to mention the D20 landscape and the D20 sphere has been so inundated with the DNA from the most litigious RPG.
And because of that, there's the mindset that that's what you have to do, or designed by gospel, as we've called it.
And as everyone knows, we hate that shit.
Mm-hmm. And I will note that that particular format of treating the martial character as Babby's first, um, I do think it's been slowly bleeding its way out over the last decade.
which is good.
Some of it is because some games have taken a more narrativist approach, where characterization is all the more important, and some of it is just because they've decided to not have such broad approaches to classes or even segment the class design. A good example of the segmented concept of class design would be the cipher system.
One of my favorites.
Because yes, it does have the archetype of the warrior rogue mage trinity, but that's 1/3 of the equation. Instead, you have the type, you have the focus, and you have the descriptor.
Right.
Or my character is an adjective, noun, who verbs.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, you don't have the in if I were to go back into say AD&D and have a party that has two fighters, they're probably going to end up playing the same.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe one's a great sword and the other one's sword and board, but at the end of the day, they're still doing just basic attack, and maybe having hirelings who are going to do more basic attacks.
Yep.
Yeah, people tried to use the hirelings as an excuse to me at a few points, and I said that's just doubling down and tripling down on the problem.
Mm.
Especially since you don't have a creative way to use hirelings.
Yeah. Now, something I do want to clarify to Dragon. It's not that we want to prevent PCs from one-shotting altogether, because that can actually stop a power fantasy. It's that we don't want PCs who can one-shot regularly and so consistently. You don't want someone who bogarts the table. Mm-hmm. You don't want someone who centralizes the game and makes it no fun for everyone else. Yes, this is a team game, but there are going to be instances where a character's just either really good for the situation and one-shots what you're fighting, or gets a really lucky roll. Yep. And so it should never be an attempt to prevent one-shotting altogether. It should be the attempt to make it fun for everyone to play, even if one-shots sometimes happen.
The reason why I pick on spells like knock is not because of overpowered or underpowered, but because by having that spell, you make the thief useless. When they're able to do just automatically, even if it's a limited amount, something that the thief has to roll for.
Right.
And
yep, it takes the it takes gameplay away from someone else.
That's why I've said that it's amusing that some people who play casters so much would be so mad about the Book of Nine Swords for stepping into their territory, because they're stepping into other people's territory, even the GM's territory, with stuff like scrying. And teleport, and anything that takes away from narrative control.
Yep.
Right.
Now, I'd say another factor is I honestly think that you can do a whole lot more interesting things with a skill-based approach. We're technically not using a skill-based approach with our project, but that doesn't mean we don't have the possibility of it. It's just in different ways, but it's more the fact that a one size fits all approach to attacks can end up feeling like you're spending several turns doing the same thing over and over. Mm-hmm. The definition of insanity. And I know Dragon is bringing up you can never stop luck. That's not a factor in what we're discussing. Yes, there's always going to be somebody who takes that lucky shot. But the thing is that luck isn't common. Even if you're building a crit fisher, it's not going to be that common. And for us, it's more about when somebody's doing that regularly and contributing more than everybody else. That's where we kind of have the problem. And I think is very telling is that the most popular martial character, according to some of the charts I got for the most litigious role playing game, is the monk. Now, one would think I would be validated with that kind of thing, but not really. For the same reason, I don't feel validated that the most popular caster is the warlock. And in the latter case, the way the game is designed, the narrative beat of the warlock doesn't have a chance to show itself. You know, the whole you've made a deal with otherworldly powers, but there's rarely ever a downside to that.
Well, I made sure that the downsides were evident whenever I play with people.
Mm-hmm. But within the actual mechanics, there isn't anything like say the downside to being a wild mage, for instance.
Mm-hmm. No real mechanical deficit.
Mm-hmm. And for me, a narrative deficit is not enough. But But I think the reason the monk ends up being that popular is, for one, there's ways to have tanky monks, and two, the key abilities. Even if some monk builds get played less, like Way of Four Elements, the fact that you have a good attacker who has all this extra stuff that they can do is going to make it more appealing than the fighter who is only going to have that extra stuff depending on if you pick certain approaches, which is why Battle Master is so popular. And what I do find kind of good.
I was going to say they aren't really picking the monk because they're martial. They're picking the monk because you can easily turn the monk into a quartercaster.
Hmm.
A quartercaster without having to deal with spells per day.
Without having to deal with spells per day, who's tankier than most casters, and has a really good option for if they're out of key points. So, and it's a way to shore up all the weaknesses of being a caster.
It's for this is also the reason why we've been singing the praises since day one of the Heavens and Heresies project.
Yep.
Because a lot of the stuff that we've covered in that game does not have those problems. There is a significant difference when it comes to melee weapons that you're picking. There is definitely a difference between martial classes, and the fighter has a massive impact in the sense that they're the biggest stance dancer out of everybody. Because instead of the whole, here's a handful of fighting styles that may modify things. Tanner looked at that and was like, let's do the opposite. Here's your fighting style stances. You can only have one active, but you have access to all of them. And even though other characters might get fighting styles, you get more of them. Because they've got to pick which. Yeah. But because of that, they're able to actually be the versatile that they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that they'd have different types of weapons is different weapons may target different defenses.
Mm-hmm.
As well as the fact that instead of criticals doing double damage, criticals have debuffs that aren't healable that easily.
Yep,
and
they do a different type of wound.
Yeah, and of course, with their approach that we have with FF Legend, the idea of doing the basic fighter is impossible. It is literally and it is physically and literally impossible to do the basic fighter because of the job and class design that we've set up.
Mm-hmm.
And even our fighter job, the approach that we took with the whole you can wield any weapon is you get more of them.
Once again, insert all the things meme here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And there is also one of the things that's really helped kill off the Babby's first character approach outside of the reason why I call it a D20 bubble is because the way the rest of the role-playing games world works and the way the fan base of the most litigious one works, one of them is clearly isolated from the rest.
Mm-hmm.
I liken it to the difference between the WWE and the rest of the wrestling world.
Yeah, that is very applicable.
But the rise of more narrative and more cinematic styles of play has certainly helped break the stigma. If there's one person who's been at the forefront for this, I'd say it's Robin Laws. Especially through things like feng shui. And some of the other stuff that he's been involved with. But I bring up feng shui because that was blatantly trying to be a tribute to Hong Kong action movies.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he even and let's not forget he also wrote a book called Blowing Up the Movies that was all about looking at famous action movies and saying, what can we steal from this?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will freely admit that I do think a lot of the reason why there is this martial divide is I think a lot of people in the early days who were game designers kind of snubbed their nose at athletes, and well, in the 70s nobody was going to know a whole lot when it came to the martial arts scene aside from certain pop culture icons.
Yeah.
And well, have you ever seen a fight scene in the original Avengers? Or if I need to twist the knife a little bit further, the original Star Trek. The point is that the understanding of fighting, even from the history nerds of the early role playing scene, wasn't as understood. And one could argue that the nerds wanted to be mages, but I find that's a bit too easy of an argument to make.
Right.
And more importantly, I think going forward, you're going to, especially given the events of the last 3 weeks, you're going to see that Babby's first character thing start to fade more and more, and the people in a lot of the romanticized old school crowd are going to be digging at their heels because they unlike me and the other people in this call, have lived and died only by one game and the approach that it's meant to be the game.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say other games are exempt from this problem because, well, there's a reason I keep picking on GURPS fans.
There's a reason we pick on any fans.
True. Very true. The thing is, when you have this idea that there's this one set of rules that you can apply to just about anything, you end up with situations where you're going to run into problems and you can't just house rule it out. That doesn't quite work as much as one would think. But I am looking forward to seeing how people will use their inspirations to break away from that stigma. But I think we've exhausted the matter. We will be revisiting this a little bit further when it comes to game design spitballing. This was just a quickie that I wanted to get out of the system. Now in the coming days, some of the material that I'm going to be doing is going to be on the lesser side because of the situation I'm currently in.
Right.
As far as Valley of the Judged on Friday, that is going to be up in the air. It may happen, it may not happen. It's just going to depend on some factors. But if it doesn't, I will make an announcement. And until I'm settled in, I don't plan on doing any new interviews. So it'll be a rare case where I'm spending evenings not working.
Right.
So with all that said, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.